What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Housing Anarchy Podcast. I have been thinking about starting this podcast for a while. It's been tooling around in my head how I actually want to approach it, what I want it to be about, etc., etc. So let's start off with why I called it the Housing Anarchy Podcast in the first place. And that's because I really started thinking about my van life. For those of you who've never heard me before, I actually have a YouTube channel called The Dawn of Vanlife. And it's a channel I started because I started living out of a car out of need. From that day forward of starting to live out of the car, I really got into van life videos. I did not get into them for travel or like adventure or breaking out of like quote unquote the norm. I got into them because I was in a place where I was living out of a vehicle and I wanted to find out how the heck you even did that for as long as I had to do it. Now, my original goals when I started living out of my vehicle were not to become a quote-unquote van lifer or a quote-unquote RVer. It was something I had thought about in the past, and it was something I thought it might be a cool thing to do at some point, but at the time that I really got into creating my original YouTube channel, The Dawn of Vanlife, which was originally called Working Homeless. It was called Working Homeless for not that long, and most people don't even remember that it ever had a different title, but it was way more about just finding a way to have housing that I could actually afford with the amount of income that was coming in, and standard housing was just not something that I had access to at that point. I had to figure out how to live out of my car for the foreseeable future, and I was investigating some ways to get into affordable housing, but all of those areas came with about a lot of loops and jumps and skippity hops and like trying to get on lists and trying to get to the top of the list and all this other stuff. And as I got deeper and deeper into van life videos, I was like, well, maybe I can just do this van thing. Like, if I can afford a van, I flat out own a home. I don't have to worry about anything else. And so what I ended up doing was I got a minivan, and I lived out of that minivan for around 2 years, actually, before I got a Chevy Express van. And then after that, I sold that and I got my box truck. So for those who are watching the visual podcast, you might notice behind me the picture of my box truck that I currently live in and that I've built out. It took me, some time to build it out. Actually, I was building it out day by day. I actually don't know how many months it took to at least get to a basic livable condition. And that's before I got it to its current state that I'm living in now, because I've made improvements on it since I quote unquote completed the build. But that's why I wanted my podcast not to be called Van Life at anything, but to be called Housing Anarchy, because it's about approaching the idea of housing in a different way. And what way can I be housed in a way that allows me to live the life that I want to live? Now, another thing, this was previous to me needing to live in a car, was I was pursuing a career in theater, specifically backstage as a stage manager. Now, ideally, if I got into my perfect state of existence, what I would be doing is working at different theaters, which may not all be located in the same state or city or whatever. And so ideally, I wanted to be able to up and go without having to worry about holding a house or paying rent on a place where I wasn't even. And these past couple of months, from March to late October, I was working for Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and there were a lot of other people who have housing elsewhere. They have apartments, homes elsewhere, and for months at a time they weren't in them, so they had to pay rent or they had to get somebody to rent it out from them. They had to worry about what was going on in their home with them not there. Some of them had roommates, but the point is, there's this house sitting for most of the months of the year without them in it. And if I was going to move forward in this career, that whole idea just seemed silly to me for the type of career I want to pursue. A career that would have me moving around to different locations, ideally. Now, I'd fought hard for this career, and for a long time it seemed like it just wasn't going to happen. Within the past year, it started to pick up. Now, at first I was like, I'm just ending up in the same city, and once I get to a city, I seem to only be able to get work in that city. And not only that, I was getting non-union work, which is lower paying than union work. And ideally I wanted to get into the union, but there were a lot of hoops and stuff to jump through to get to that point. And I was just struggling to jump those hoops to get past the non-union barrier into the union work. And I finally was able to do that again these past few months working with OSF. At this point, I have applied to the union, I've paid my dues, and I'm in the process of becoming a full-fledged member with hopefully some union work coming down the pipeline, which will pay much better than the non-union work. Some people, because they became aware of me of my YouTube channel, thought that I wanted to be a YouTuber. Of course, I have a YouTube channel, and I'm trying to start a podcast, but this is more because I want to share information about my journey, not because I want to quote-unquote be a podcaster or be a YouTuber. And it's not because I devalue those careers. I think those are some of the most hardworking people I've ever met. Like, the people who get really big, who, make serious money doing this and actually have this as their full-term primary career, they work their butts off. They get up and go to sleep thinking about their next piece of content. For me, that's a stressful existence, so I do want to kind of keep this in a certain bubble, because my priority is always going to be that stage management career, the backstage work. Like, that's the stuff I really want to do. But also, from the perspective of someone who's living nomad life, van life, a little bit different, I do think there's knowledge I can share, and that's one of the reasons I want to still have the YouTube channel and still have the podcast. It's just at this point, I kind of started the YouTube channel randomly, and I'm trying to recontextualize what do I actually have to offer other people. Ideally, with this podcast, I'd also like to get a chance to talk to people who are doing nomad life or van life or some sort of alternative living different from me, even. And different from what you generally see on YouTube. Like, the biggest quote-unquote van life or nomad videos on YouTube are about travel as a first priority. I have never considered travel my first priority. Travel is like priority number 4. Like, priority number 1 was affordable housing. This box truck is paid for, and if I can use the fact that it's paid for to save money, then I have money if it ever needs to be replaced or fixed. So I'm not putting money towards rent or a mortgage or anything else. And I am putting money towards vehicle maintenance, but honestly, in the numbers I'm running, that's still way cheaper than maintaining a house. Now, I don't know if I'll ever want a house in the future or want to settle down or be forced to by circumstances, but right now that's not the case. So the best thing I can do is set myself up so that if I do hit those circumstances, I am able to make that transition. But right now, travel is not the priority. Just having a house was the first priority, and I feel like I've accomplished that, moving from, a car that I did not prepare to live in to a box truck that's now fully built out as a little mini cabin on wheels. Number 2, I wanted the ability to up and leave for work at the drop of a dime. And because my house is on wheels, that's somewhat been accomplished. I will say there's been a little more complications than I originally thought. Namely, sometimes with the size of the box truck, I have to be like, okay, I can take the job, but I live in this vehicle, it's this size, and now also I have a pet. When I went to Oregon Shakespeare Festival recently, what I initially intended was to stay in the box truck. I will say it got very, very hot, and what I was concerned about is because I do have pets now, I have 2 cats, I was concerned about leaving them in the box truck for many, many hours without me. There's a lot of things I can set up to alert me to bad temperatures. I have nanny cams for the cats and all this other type of stuff. But if I'm not physically in the box truck and it's going to take me a walk or a travel or something to get to the box truck, it is very different leaving my cats in here all day for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or however long my work shift is without me having direct, immediate access to the box truck. So even if I have an alert, I now have to separate myself from work, inform people, and then get physically to the box truck, which where I was parking it while I was in Oregon wasn't near me. I mean, it wasn't that long of a walk, but it wasn't like I could walk out the door and it was parked out front. I got a driveway that I had permission to park in, and for a while it worked out, but eventually I had to talk to Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and luckily most of the places that you work, when you work for a union house, will offer you employee housing, and I'd originally declined. And so later on in the season, I was like, you know what, for the safety of my pets, I need to take this housing. And I don't really consider that like a bad thing. There was a time where I thought it was a failing, but I completely changed my perspective on it. And if it's available, it gave me a chance to move out the box truck, to really do some resetting. And then when I was done, I had my house on wheels to jump back into. And so that was another big priority for me, was something that was flexible around my career goals, and not something that, you know, was going to take me traveling, as it were, as an open goal where I'm just jumping all over the place, freeform or anything like that. Like, that was not my goal. So priority number 2 was housing that was flexible. And priority number 3 was just like something I owned fully. And right now, I own this fully. Now, that does mean if I lose it, I've lost everything, but that's why my second phase is so much about savings for replacement. I have no plans to like replace the box truck in the near future. Like, it's perfectly functional. I've just gotten a lot of stuff done while I was in Oregon, and that's why sort of savings went on the back burner for things that needed to get done to the box truck, from upgrading my power system, buying an air conditioner, mechanical things I got done, regular maintenance I got done, and those things took a good chunk of change on top of me just living and surviving and paying my bills. And so the phase of having the financial security for the box truck to fail is also there, or what I'm working towards. It's not there yet, but that's the other thing I'm working towards. And then the fourth thing is, when I don't have work and hopefully have the money for it, being able to travel without incurring travel costs. So like I said, it's like priority number 4. I do like that if I don't have a job at the present, if I don't have, you know, obligations to be somewhere specific, I can just take my whole house with me. Now, this also comes with complications that I would love to talk about in future videos, because the thing is, like, there is no option, no easy option. There are options. There are things I could explore, friends I could reach out to, but there is no easy option when it would make more sense to leave my box truck behind, because I don't own property. I don't own a house. So it's not like I can just go park this in the driveway, jump on a plane, and take a job and be there in 48 hours if that's offered. And yes, that is a situation that could occur in my career where they need a stage manager immediately. I'm available for the dates, but if I have to take time to drive there, I wouldn't make it. Like, that is something that could happen. Obviously, there are methods to explore. There are friends I could reach out to, you know, but also because I don't have a house, like, who's going to care for the cat? So now I have the pets and the vehicle being safe if I do ever take the option to get on a plane and go anywhere where I can't drive there, or driving there would be difficult, or driving there would take too long. So that even incurs some hurdles. But for the overall, I'm sort of defining my van life, my nomad life on my own terms. And so for me, it's about the alternative housing element more than the travel element. And I find that an unusual thing in the whole alternative housing space, because so much of it is about travel being the fanciest travel channel. I find like maybe 80% of van life channels are travel channels, or 80% of van life content is travel content. 20% is van porn, as I like to call it, and that's anything that has to do with van building, van tours, just showing up off the actual van itself, like better homes and vans. Look how close I got this van to an apartment, at least aesthetically speaking, because there are ways home on wheels will never be like a sticks and bricks home. There's just divides between it. Like, if you have a home on wheels, you always have to carry water. Like, you can hook up to systems, but if you leave, you now leave those systems. So you can have the ability to hook up to running water. You can have the ability to hook up to electricity. But as soon as you want to perform the main function of having a house on wheels, that is taking the wheels and moving them, you lose that connection. If you're off-grid living, there are some things that sort of sync up with van life, because I do want that to be a part of housing anarchy, is like things like off-grid living or any sort of off-grid sort of lifestyle is a big thing I want to be a part of housing anarchy, and it is different from van life in some ways. Like, yeah, you don't have maybe electricity hooked to the grid, but you can set up a whole bunch of solar panels in an array that doesn't necessarily have to be attached to the vehicle. You aren't limited by the size of your roof if you're using solar in an off-grid situation. You know, if you want to get a generator in an off-grid situation, you are not restricted to where am I going to carry it, where am I going to put it. You know, so an off-grid situation has similarities, like both of me and somebody who lives off-grid may be considering a generator, but sort of the needs of that generator, what's possible, where we're going to store it, you know, how we're going to use it might be slightly different. And so I do want be able to talk to people who are maybe doing off-grid life in a way that's different from me. Because like what I'm doing, van life, RV living, all that stuff could be considered quote unquote off-grid. Even if you hook up occasionally, like it's not something that you're never permanently linked to the grid. So maybe you're semi-grid. Like maybe you're an RVer who like you go from RV park to RV park. So you're semi-grid, so you're not fully off-grid, but there are going to be moments where, like, you need to stop driving in the middle of the night, and you're in a, you know, a freaking parking lot or a rest area, you know, and you want to get up in the morning and make breakfast and stuff, and you can't rely on an unlimited source of power from a grid. Also, there's people who live on boats. There's people who do nomad life, not by owning a vehicle of a certain sort, but what they might do is they might Airbnb and hotel and just not have like a permanent home anywhere. There are people who choose that sort of life and do off-grid and nomad life without actually, I don't know about off-grid, but there are people who do nomad life not in a vehicle, or like not fully attached to the vehicle as a thing. Like I met a couple, I met a guy who, him and his, I don't know if his wife, his girlfriend, his partner, where him and his partner, they are nomads, but they just have like a big 4-wheel drive vehicle for adventuring, but they don't live in it. They do Airbnbs and they do hotels and things like that. And for them, especially with them having to work on the road, they like that better, because when they go to a hotel, they go to the Airbnb, you know, they're able to use as much power, water, electricity that they want to, and that fits their life more. So I would love to like have a platform for talking to these people and finding out how their goals led them down these alternative roads. And even people like me who were sort of forced into a homelessness situation and evolved from that into some sort of power position where they found a different way of doing housing for themselves. You know, I really want to explore what that alternative housing space looks like, be it in a van, an off-grid cabin, a boat, whatever. I want to ask those questions. I want to explore those stories, and I want to share my stories. I want to share very specific tips, thoughts, discussions, all of that in the Housing Anarchy podcast. So why Housing Anarchy? Because I feel like Housing Anarchy is going to be able to cover things differently than the Dawn of Van Life YouTube channel. And I think I needed this second space to have those discussions, because when people see the Dawn of Van Life channel, which I don't want to change, it's been a very strong part of my existence since I found myself living in the car, even if it had a different title before. But the Dawn of Van Life channel comes with the expectation of van life content, which it sometimes fulfills. More than often than not, it fulfills. But for me, the housing angle of it, to have an alternative way of doing housing, creating housing anarchy, is what this whole journey has been about for me. And so I really want a place to focus on that, to explore that, and to find all the other ways that people are living in housing anarchy. All right, I'll see you next week.